Yeah, yeah. Deep in the dirt where the hurt gets sown, I rose grown from the stones they throw. Storms hit, but the core stay warm. Still form from the thorns and the rose I know. Sunlight drip when the night gets cold. Fight grip on a dream, never let that go. Roots run thick through the cuts in my soul. Turn dust into gold when the pressure unfolds. Like palms that sway in a quake. I bend, I break, still shape every wave I face. Concrete faith in the cracks of the street. Plant seeds where the weeds and the pain embrace. Take every loss is just a part of the law that the rain gon' draw. Now my growth feel great. From droughts to the floods, I adjust with the love. Put the mud in the cup, make the roots taste safe. I surf through the surge like a verse on beat. Keep heat in the chest while the test run deep. West breeze in the step with the trap, so speak. Put grit in the ground while the shine stay sleek. Every scar that I wear just declare I've been there, still rare in the glare and the noise they preach. Yeah, grounded in the grind, but the mind stays free. Welcome to Rooted and Rising. Peace.
Welcome back, family, to another episode of Rooted and Rising. And you already know what the show is about. It's about real stories and real growth, the stuff that shapes who we are and where we're becoming. In today's episode, this one means something to me personally because we're going to be talking about accountability, follow through, determination, and what it really means to be self-made. But we're also talking about legacy, culture, and the role Black men play in uplifting and guiding the next generation. There's a quote from Winston Churchill that says, "The price of greatness is responsibility." And I think that hits even harder when you grew up in a family where the men had to be something. They had to show up. They had to carry more than their share sometimes. So today, I brought someone who embodies all of that, my Uncle Milton. He's an artist, an educator, a business owner, and someone who uses his work to carry our history forward. Unc, I appreciate you being here.
Man, it's an honor, man. And before we get started, I just want to say, um, this is an extremely wonderful opportunity. I am immensely proud of you and the work that you're doing. And I have nothing but admiration, love, and support for you stepping into this particular platform and creating something that allows people to have a voice, an authentic voice, and have discussions and conversations and topics. And I've been following your podcast since you started it. And I wish you all the best and all the success because, being in media is not easy, but especially for a Black man entering into the media space in this time that we are currently in is not just important, it's extremely needed and valuable. So, I just want to say I'm extremely proud of you, nephew.
I appreciate that. It means a lot. All right, Unc. So I would like to start from the beginning for the folks who, obviously may not know who you are. Uh, Explain to us who Milton is, what lanes you're in, and how this whole journey started for you.
Okay. Um, one of your cousins, I won't mention which one it is, but, but one of your cousins called me the most famous, unfamous person that they knew. Man, the easiest way to start this is I sign all of my artwork Milton 510. And a lot of people, when they first see that, when they read my bio, they assume that I'm signing my artwork Milton 510 because I'm representing Oakland, where I was born and raised, Oakland,
Mm-hmm.
California. The area code is 510. But I actually signed all of my artwork Milton 510 because I'm the fifth boy in a family of 10 children. I was the fifth boy and the 10th child. And so, um, growing up in a big family, you don't get to make a lot of choices being the baby. It's like, you know, the television is controlled, the radio is controlled. You have no say so on what you're gonna eat. I mean, it's a very restrictive situation, but it helped ground me and give me a sense of framework and um intestinal fortitude to want to do something to make a mark that made me stand out. So I signed all of my artwork, Milton 510, as a silent tribute to my family, because without them and the way I was raised, there's no way that I would have become, you know, an artist, especially in this fine art space.
Okay. Uh, uh, to follow up, right, is what I love about you is like you didn't wait for someone else's permission for you to, you know what I'm saying,
Yeah.
become the creative person that you are, right? And I feel like that's a different kind of accountability. So let me ask you, when did you realize, all right, if this is going to happen, it's on me. No excuses, no waiting.
Well, that oh man, that's a layered question because it comes in a couple of stages. As you well know, but the audience won't know this, that I lost my father suddenly at a very young age. So when I was 9 years old, my father passed away, and at that same time, you know, I already had two older brothers that were servicemen. Your two oldest uncles, the twins, Perry and
Uh-huh.
Jerry, they were servicemen. Um, my brother Greg was getting ready to graduate and head off to the military. He chose to go to the Air Force. Um, so I really, in my immediate understanding of childhood, the closest connection with one of my brothers was your father, who protected me. I I don't want to get emotional, but he was a stabilizing force. But then he suddenly went away right after graduation and joined the Marines. So community became extremely important to me. Now, losing your father at such a young age, there were no conversations about mental health in the Black community.
Right.
Nobody was talking about how to deal with grief and stress and, like, how do you deal with that? And I was already struggling with what I know now to be identity issues because of being the baby in such a large family. I never really felt fully seen. So quietly, I started dabbling in graffiti. And it wasn't nothing celebrated, it was really just the explosion of hip hop had just started.
Mm-hmm.
Me and the homies, you're like, I remember the first time I heard, Rapper's Delight on the radio. You know what I'm saying? It was life altering. But what moved me the most is late one night, your dad is listening to K-Poo, which is an old
Mm-hmm.
school Bay Area radio station that you got to be careful how you turn the dial so it'll come in. And we heard this song, The Message, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five. And for some reason, unlike Rapper's Delight, this particular song, the images became so clear in my head, like the broken glass everywhere, people pissing on the ground as if they just don't care. Yeah, I could see that, but it was illustrating Oakland to me. Now these cats is in New York, and I'm hearing it on the radio, but the pictures that were vividly popping into my brain was East Oakland, and that's all I could see. And so I was like, man, I've never had aspirations to be a rapper. Although I grew up with some very famous ones and have, become close friends with a lot of rappers and famous rappers in the industry, um, you know, I actually went to junior high school with one of the founding members of Digital Underground, Money B. And
Mhm.
we have these conversations where we talk about the old times and the old days. He was the one who actually introduced me to Tupac. So I was able to form a friendship with Pac. Um, but looking back and never having an aspiration, although I played music, in school, I played
Mhm.
instruments. But for me, it was always the visual art thing. So I got in trouble dabbling in graffiti. That's a whole nother podcast for you. But um that that interaction with, getting in trouble doing graffiti landed me at an art school. And once I got into art school, it was almost like, man, this was just meant to be. So listening to this new music that is just, taking over like, a wildfire, just spreading, and now having some instruction of how to use creativity to communicate. It was like, this is where I need to be.
Mhm.
And the art school gave me a sense of entrepreneurship, which I think all art does. The beauty of art and why I continue to teach art today to young people is there's no greater there's no greater obstacle than to put a blank white piece of paper in front of a young person and tell them, okay, start the decision making process. That decision could be something as simple as, where do I sign my name? But what it does subconsciously is it triggers a mechanism in your brain that makes you start to think and solve a problem. Where do I put my first mark? How do I put my first mark? What should my first mark be? Do I do this in color? Am I only using a pencil? Do I want to use a Sharpie marker? It starts the brain, it activates the brain in a way that forces you subconsciously to engage problem solving. So, going to a school that fostered this
Mhm.
and going in a community, and living in a community that presented these different challenges, art became a very effective way of me looking at my community and figuring out ways how to solve problems. Now, all the time, solving those problems might not exactly be the best way to solve a problem,
Yeah.
but it did give me the tools to be a very creative thinker and not wait to get that process started.
Okay. So I've I have another question, right? Because uh, one thing that you mentioned was all your brothers were in the service, and I know you yourself were in the service as well, right? Do you think you being in the army helped uh, your process with creating art, or do you feel like it hindered you while you were in the service, and then you had to like almost relearn some things after you transitioned out?
No, I think it was just the opposite. I mean, I'm the type of person that I believe that everything happens for a reason. So the funny thing about this, I don't like to call it ironic, but the funny thing about, my path to becoming an artist is that, not understanding how to deal with, grief and trauma, um, made me become extremely creative. That creativity would land me in a little bit of trouble, but that would actually land me at art school. Now, I go to art school from 7th grade through 12th grade. I did my junior high school years and my high school years at the Renaissance School of Arts in North Oakland. I graduated as class president, top of my class. I was offered 2 scholarships when I was graduating high school. I got a scholarship to the San Francisco Art Institute, which is defunct now, but I accepted the scholarship from the California College of Arts and Crafts, which is now known as the California College of Art. Um, and this is when they still had their Oakland campus. So I accepted the scholarship, 4-year scholarship, did my freshman year, but I never felt comfortable at the college.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different reasons why. I mean, I had started taking classes at that college at the second half of my 10th grade year because I got so good at my school that they started sending me across the street to take freshman level art courses, while I was, a sophomore, a junior, and then ultimately a senior. So I had relationships with the teachers and everything on the campus already.
Mm-hmm.
But again, when I landed there in my freshman year, I reverted back to a situation where I didn't really feel seen being on this big prestigious art college campus. Now, as you know, one of my oldest brothers, because my 2 oldest brothers are twins, one of my oldest brothers was in the Army, and at this time he was a recruiter. So just to get out of Oakland, because my mother was like, your grandmother, uh, my mother, was like, I don't want you hanging around Oakland all summer doing nothing. And I'm like, well, I ain't gonna be doing nothing. She's like, nah, I know how you are. Why don't you go down and spend some time with your brother in Southern California? He says, he could, you know, keep you busy around the office and stuff like this. So I went down to visit my brother Jerry in San Diego. That's where he was living at as a recruiter. And over the course of that summer, he would convince me to join the military. And as you know, we come from a military family.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't unfamiliar with me. I was familiar with it, so knowing all of my brothers and hearing all of the stories and, them sending gifts home from foreign countries and all of this, it didn't seem like I was really giving up that much to walk away from art college to go do this adventurous job. So I joined the military. I never came home to Oakland after that summer. Like, I didn't come back, say bye to moms or whatever. My brother Jerry was like, no, if you're going to go, you need to go from here. I don't want you going home, changing your mind, And so I left from San Diego at the end of that summer in October and went to Fort Dix, New Jersey for basic training. Right when the winter is starting, and I'm born and raised in California and ain't never been nowhere other than California. That was a little bit of a shock, getting some of that, New Jersey winter weather. But through my course of service, I became a paratrooper. I landed in the 5th Special Forces Unit. I would get injured on a JTX, a joint training operation in Egypt of all places, and had a high ankle sprain. I'm sitting recovering. Your company commander has to do the mental, wellness checks. He comes by, checks on you, see if everything is okay. And he sees me sketching because one of my closest friends in the military had given me a sketch pad because we often talked about our backgrounds and they knew that I was an artist. And I would draw funny cartoons of them in the mess hall and stuff like that. So everybody knew that I had this hidden talent, but they didn't know how extensive it was. They didn't know that I had went to college for it or any of that. But my company commander saw it. It was like, Bowens, you did these? And I was like, yeah, I'm just fooling around, And they pulled my service record, saw that the reason I came into the service as a private first class is because I had completed a year at this college that happened to be an art college. And they changed my job and made me an Army illustrator. So
That's
they
nice.
changed my MOS. I became an Army illustrator. And after that, I started creating art for dignitaries who would come visit our unit. That would actually get me collected. Right now, I'm collected by two of the Army's most prestigious museums. I have work at the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Museum at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. There's actually a billboard outside of Fort Bragg that has a picture that I did when I was at Fifth Special Forces Group. They took one of my images and made it into a billboard, and they also turned it into some plaques that people give away. And I never got any royalties or anything for that. People don't understand how it works. Like when you're employed with the military, everything you do belongs to the government. So it
Yeah.
wasn't everything that I drew, everything that I created became property of the United States Army. You know, because for a while you could still see my signature on the pieces, but now you don't see anything. I have a couple of buddies who retired and got plaques with my artwork on it, but it doesn't have any acknowledgement that I was the artist who created the original image. Um, so I would be collected by the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Museum in Fort Bragg, and then when our unit got relocated to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, the Don F. Pratt Memorial Museum would collect my work because I did some work on celebrating the 101st Airborne. So, I figured at that point, as much as I've been, not really fully embracing art, that art was going to probably be the thing that I would do for the rest of my life.
Okay. With that being said, right, I want to dive a little bit deeper into accountability because I think a lot of people get it confused with getting in trouble or fixing mistakes. But I feel that it's really just about showing up every day, especially when nobody's clapping for you yet, right? And so for you, what does accountability look like in your daily life? Not just as a business owner, but as a Black man, an educator, and an artist.
Well, I agree with you. And that's one of the reasons why I think your platform is so important, is because accountability is not, you know, easily defined. This is not, put a round peg into a round circle, definition. Some things have nuances and some things are very layered. Accountability for me starts with self. Like, how do you hold yourself accountable before anything else? Before any of the outside forces that we have to deal with, before any of the relationships that we're involved in, before any of the business practices you undertake, how are you being accountable to yourself? Like, what keeps you happy? What keeps you principled? What keeps you motivated? And what makes you get up every day and start it all over again? So, accountability for me starts with, why am I here? And what do I feel I've been tasked to do? And when I take stock in that, then I say, okay, am I doing everything I can do to achieve the goals I've set for myself? Have I made promises or commitments to certain things or people that I need to keep and uphold? And am I actively taking measures to meet and satisfy all of those things? And if I'm not, then I start to look at, is this something that I need to change in myself? Or is there something that I need to figure out how to deal with that is an outside force or an extraneous circumstance that I may or may not have any control over?
Uh-huh.
Because as you know, a lot of things that happen, we don't have control over.
Right.
But how we face it or deal with it or let it affect us, we can control. So that's kind of how I operate. Um, in loving history, and I think my love for history came when I got into art school, because when you study art, you're really studying art history. You're studying these techniques and these practices that are, old as, the cave drawings in Glasgow. So they go all the way back to the beginning of modern time, mankind.
Uh-huh.
But as art developed, there's a history with that. And some people will confuse history with memory. They're not the same thing.
Right.
Your memory of something could be etched in stone, and you'll believe that that's the way it happened, that's the way it was recorded. Can't nobody tell you differently, but that's not the history. Your memory is not the history. The history is the researched facts and data that can be proven that becomes history. So when people come with opinions and ideology, I got time for it. If you can't support it with the data and the facts and the research, then it's just an opinion.
Yep.
That's your memory. That's how you think it happened. That's how you want to see it. But
Hmm.
that ain't how it happened. And coming to a love and appreciation for that. And I learned that in the military. Like, I started looking while I was in serving time in the military, I was reflecting back on my time at art school, growing up in Oakland. I'm living in the South, dealing with some different realities because I wasn't used to that type of culture. You know,
Uh-huh.
I ain't never seen no state trooper wearing no big Smokey the Bear hat, with mirror sunglasses, calling me boy. Well, I mean, like, yeah, I'm a grown ass man. What you calling me boy? You know,
Yeah.
I'm at that time. I'm a private first class in the Army, the United States military. How do you see me as a boy? You know what I'm saying? So having to deal with these things forces you to really start in real time developing certain strategies and mechanisms of, what does accountability look like? How do you hold yourself accountable? And, how should you see accountability coming from others as well, too?
I like that. And I feel like that's some of the part like people don't really understand, right? It's like accountability is quiet, it's not loud or pretty. And I'm gonna ask you another question about accountability before we close out this topic, right? Is I know creatives go through a lot of like trying to find inspiration and the motivation, right? So how do you stay accountable when inspiration isn't necessarily showing up and when you don't feel that motivated to be in a creative space like that?
Um, there's only one way I can answer this question. I don't mean to come across as dismissive or arrogant. Um, but I'm a black man in America, and my topic that I have chosen to deal with creatively is history. So I'm never going to have an artist block. I'm never going to not be motivated because there's too much history as a black man in this country that hasn't been correctly told, hasn't been correctly dealt with, hasn't been correctly acknowledged, that I could live to be 250 and still not have dealt with the expansiveness of Black history in America.
I like that. And I think it like that's one thing I feel that our community as a whole needs to hone in on, right? Is like there's a lot of these, I won't say myths or I don't know the word I'm looking for, but like, oh, you shouldn't do this, or, you know, we don't necessarily like carry on, like pass the torch of knowledge down, right? Like sometimes it stops with a certain family member or a certain public figure will idolize that person, but then once they're no longer in the limelight, then that information flow stops, right? So I just feel like as a community, as a whole, like we could do way better at uh passing on our history, teaching it to the younger generation, and but like have more outlets to do so. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and so I'm glad you said that, because the one thing when we look at why history sometimes becomes stagnant, that's not by accident. I want to start by saying that. That's not by accident. Um, when we look at history as a set of facts that we have data on that has been researched, peer reviewed, documented, that's how we need to look at, analyze, and assess history. But most of the time, we're looking at history through this glorified emotional lens of memory and nostalgia. But I was born in 1967, right? So the reality is simple, that Black folks in our quote unquote full inclusion into this country's democracy, since we're talking about the protection of history and passing down legacies and talking about what's important and what came before us and how we need to use that as the blueprint to move forward, Black folks have really only participated in democracy for 3 years longer than I've been born. I was born in 1967.
Yeah.
You're talking about a Voting Rights Act in 1964. You're talking about a Civil Rights Act in 1965. I was born in 1967. Now, it's not a coincidence that I happen to be born a year after the Black Panther Party of Self-Defense was formed in Oakland in 1966. This is 2 years after a Voting Rights Act. This is 1 year after the passage of a civil rights movement, which tells you that even though we make these political and policy accomplishments, the struggle in the hood don't stop. Because if it did, there wouldn't have been no need for the Black Panther Party of Self-Defense 1966 to ever form. But it had to form. And I was born a year after that. Now I sit before you 50 some odd years later, and we are still fighting the struggle that Dr. King, Malcolm X, Bayard Rustin, Stokely Carmichael, Huey P. Newton, Bobby Seale, Angela Davis, Kathleen Cleaver, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ella Baker, all fought. We're fighting it still today. And if you don't know those names, that means you are disconnected from the importance of a small portion of our cultural history.
I agree. Now, people start stuff all the time, right? But it's the finishing part. And I can say I'm a testament to that, because when I when I was going to retire from the Navy, right, I felt like I was losing my sense of purpose, because all I knew was, you know, being Tim in the Navy, and I didn't know anything else. Like, the thought of being out of the Navy and then being able to be like having the opportunity to be a full-time dad to Levi and Cole was, I would fucking lose sleep over that, right? And it was because, like, I didn't know how to balance just being a dad, but I knew I could do the Navy and be a dad, because, that's how my life had been structured for so long. So I started a podcast. Originally, my first channel was called Roots and Resilience, and I had a couple of episodes, and then, like, I felt like I could have went somewhere with it, but I don't want to say I lost my passion, but I just lost, like, I didn't have enough follow through with that channel, so I had to put it to bed, and I kind of like slept on it for a little bit, and then um I don't really know what changed, but something changed, and I think what it was is I was out one day. I was at a bar actually. One of my favorite bars to go drink at. It's a place called Longboards. It was me and my best friend Julius. We were sitting there, and it was an old retired vet. He was telling me about how he was in the Korean War, and he, fought on the patrol boats that was out there, and he had some amazing stories. And he had asked me, in my time of service, had I ever experienced anything like he experienced in the Korean War? And I told him, like the only thing I can think of is I was boots on ground in Iraq, and I told him my story about when I was in Iraq. And then he was like, you should be more open to telling your story, because you never know who needs to hear it. And then he gave me we shook hands, and he was like, I appreciate you sitting down with an old man and talking to me. I haven't talked like that, and I can't even tell you how long. I appreciate it. And then it just made me think, like, well, maybe somebody else out there can. I just got to talk, and maybe I'm telling somebody else's story through my story, and they can go through the healing and all the other stuff, right? And that's what made me start my podcast now, Rooted and Rising. And I didn't want to just focus on the military aspect of, hey, I'm a Navy veteran. Listen to me complain about what it was like to be in the Navy and all this stuff, right? Because there's so much more to that. There's so much more that people go through, and it's not just about the struggles of a vet. Because not only am I a veteran, but you know, I'm a black man in America. I'm raising 2 kids, and I'm a grandfather now. You know what I mean? I'm a cancer survivor. All these other things that I could tap into. That's not just, oh, here's another vet that's starting a veteran podcast that wants to talk about the military and their policies. Like, yeah, I can touch on that stuff, but I didn't want that to be my main focus. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, um, first, I love the story. Um, the one thing that I say is conversation is key. Conversation is your first bridge to understanding. Now, we can have a conversation, and I may agree with you, I may not agree with you. I may understand you, I may not understand you. I don't know if you ever tried to have conversations with people from Louisiana or here in Alabama or St. Louis or Baltimore. Like, it's some strange accents in America.
Uh-huh.
So, people use different terminology, different slang words, but I find all of that intriguing. And I would never know any of those nuances if I hadn't sat down and had conversations with individuals. I would never know those experience had I never visit those cities to do an art event. You know, being in the military, getting outside of the country and getting different perspectives on not just people from foreign countries, but how people from foreign countries view you as a military serviceman, but also how they view you as a black man being in military service. There's a lot of strong opinions around the world over the African American experience and, patriotism here in the US.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole nother podcast.
It is.
Um, but, listening to, the motivation question and like finding your purpose or getting back in the groove, so to speak, finding your voice, lack of a better term, finding your voice, you know, as an artist, I think it's extremely easy. And I'm going to speak for myself, but I have had this conversation with many other creatives. The simple fact that creativity, that singing, songwriting, pottery, visual art, dancing, theater, it's completion oriented. You can't call yourself a screenwriter or a playwright if you don't finish the story. That shit don't never make it to stage or to the screen. It's like, if you don't finish it, you can't shop it, you can't get a deal, you can't
Mhm.
hire a director, you won't get producers. You got to have a finished script. It's got to be complete. I could never get a gallery show. I could never get a museum to collect me if I don't finish my damn artwork. Now, some artists will say, well, a painting is never finished. Okay, that sounds cute. It's cool, but
Yeah.
trust me, somebody looked at it and felt that it was finished enough to put it in a gallery or to stick it in a museum.
Yeah.
So there's about this completion thing. So I think for creatives, inherently, we have a mechanism where we are compelled to finish what we start. Like, we can't start something and not finish it if we expect to get that work seen, for it to be visible, for it to have its life expectancy accepted into the world. Now, you have plenty of artists and plenty of creatives that don't finish stuff, and they might not feel, the same way I feel about the completion process, and that's to each his own. But there is a dramatic difference of being an artist that does art for a hobby and being an artist that now there are expectations placed on you because you're in this thing that they call the fine art world. That's totally different. You've probably heard before somebody say the statement that anybody can do art or anybody can create art or be an artist.
Mhm.
That is the most asinine ass statement I've ever heard. That's like saying everybody can be a doctor or everybody can be a dentist or everybody could be a football player. Everybody can play football, but everybody don't make it to the NFL. Everybody can shoot basketball. Everybody won't become Steph Curry. If
Yeah.
if you could jump and dunk like Michael Jordan, you would.
Facts. So I got a question for you. Huh? What taught you the value of follow through?
Oh, like I said, I mean, simply the value of follow through. I could go back to tagging Oakland police cars or 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 putting my name on the side of, post office trucks and DHL and FedEx trucks. And you know, uh in Oakland, the police cars have this slogan on them: to protect and serve. So I would go up behind the slogan and I would write "to protect and serve," my graffiti name at the time. I'm not going to say it on air because
Uh-huh.
there is if that is still written somewhere in Oakland, they could come harass a brother for, public defacement. But I would do that. And then I would sit at the bus stop to see it go by and laugh and snicker because I'm basically saying the Oakland police is protecting and serving me. Although I didn't feel they did, that was my way of saying you should do this. You should protect and serve me.
Yeah.
So you got to have a tremendous amount of follow through when you're doing something that you ain't supposed to be doing. there's a small window of time to accomplish what you're doing. And if you don't meet those objectives, you're going to be in trouble. Like that, honestly, that's where my follow through actually started. Now, how it would develop is, going to a school, an art school, becoming formally trained, on certain procedures and techniques. And this notion that, that art is just a hobby, that it's just a busy activity that keeps people engaged. No, I went to an art school with teachers who graded my projects, meaning I had to complete those projects to get a grade or I could not graduate. There is a completion part that was embedded into me in art school that I think is fundamental in all forms of education. This notion that, you know, we move through life and everything is just by chance or circumstance is the furthest thing from the truth. You are the best person to make luck happen and to make miracles appear because it all starts with you, what you put out into the universe, and then what that universe returns to you. Like Dr. King said, there is really no faith without practice and action. You got to believe it. You got to go out and do it for it to really be beneficial and affect you and others.
Yeah. I agree 100%, and that's like a a lesson I'm struggling with right now to try to teach my to teach Levi, right? Like I, that's a topic for another day. We'll talk about that offline or something. But yes, that what you said is the you have to believe it to achieve it essentially, right? It's
Yeah.
like I'm trying to preach that to my boys to because I feel like um I don't know if it's like just this generation of kids that's coming up now, but it's even though I feel like stuff is a little bit easier because they have the information right in the palm of their hand with all these devices and everything. I still feel like they assume a lot of times the answer is going to be no, or they're going to be told they can't do something because of insert a random reason, right? So I try to preach to them, you know what I'm saying? Like you have to put it in your head that you're going to achieve it first and then it will happen.
So share this with my great nephews. Explain to them that information is not knowledge. Google does not make you a scholar. Google just gives you a little bit of information. If you don't know something or you're curious about something, you can Google it. And Google is going to give you a little bit of information. But that's not knowledge. Knowledge is having a deeper understanding of that information and how it affects everything around you and how that information actually informs your actions. That's knowledge. So I could learn every statistic I want to learn about Steph Curry. That doesn't make me knowledgeable about Steph Curry. That means I'm informed about Steph Curry and his stats. But if I would have an opportunity to read his memoir, watch him in a documentary, read anything that he has written on his philosophy or his understanding in life, look at the different businesses that he's opened, look at the different charities that he's involved in, and in that rare opportunity, get a chance to sit down with him and have a personal conversation with him. Now I can start to form a sense of knowledge around why he is the unique person that he is. There's a lot of players in the NBA currently that have fathers who played in the NBA. So what made him that much more exceptional than, say, Michael Jordan's son? Jordan had a son. He ain't in the
Mhm.
NBA. You know, what makes him that much more acceptable? Bronny's career is still being, played out in front of our eyes. Will he become great like his dad? Will Bryce become great like LeBron or even greater? We don't know. But all I'm saying is that we could start to gain some knowledge with a deeper dive into why certain things play out or happen the way that it happens. That's why research and peer review are so important. And it doesn't matter if you're an artist or if you are, an astrophysicist. Research and having someone review that research so you can have dialogue back and forth with scholars in the field, that's what actually gets to a clear understanding of taking information from pure sound bites to having some real knowledge. I was asked one time in an interview, man, that, my artwork sometimes is referred to, described, or even categorized as political art. And they asked me how I felt about that. Why are you always making political statements? And that's a very nuanced and layered question, because the Black experience, by definition, is a political experience in the Americas. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for politics. So to say what I'm doing is political doesn't bother me at all. But if you are making an assumption or you're insinuating that my belief or my depiction of history is partisan or political, now I got to stop you. Because all I'm painting is the American foundational Black experience. And it's backed up by facts, data, and research. It's not an opinion. It's not partisan. It's history.
Mm-hmm.
I ain't never seen a statue of an art critic in front of a museum. And until I do, I'm going to take their opinion very lightly.
No, hey, I'm with you on that. So let's talk about being self-made. And I know everybody loves that title until they realize what it costs, right? So when you hear self-made, what does that mean to you?
When I hear self-made, all I hear is, ain't no way I did all of this shit by myself. I mean, that's just the facts. We don't get to our stations in life, all on our own. As much as people want to, say, well, I'm this, I'm that, or I did this, or I accomplished that. Man, every accomplishment comes with assistance. You know, um, and unfortunately, as you get older, you start to realize that even more. That when you were younger, your hubris, your ego, all of these things may have made you believe that you were doing something by yourself. But in reality, nothing is accomplished by, with a single action, you know. And, let's jump back to our, service years for a second. You might be a soldier sitting in a foxhole under fire. And, you may put down 3 enemy combatants. And you're going to believe that you accomplished that feat all by yourself until you realize it was your drill sergeant several years ago who kept you out at the range in the rain and forced you to shoot expert so you would be able to survive in a combat situation. So even in that moment that you think you survived on your own, you actually didn't. It was your muscle memory that somebody had instilled in you many years ago that allowed you to be prepared to take advantage of that opportunity to not only save your life, but possibly save a campaign or save you, some loved ones, and your other soldiers or colleagues. So everything accomplished is accomplished with someone else's assistance, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. So, but I understand your question about being self-made. Being a Black man in the industry of fine art was not something that I could wait around for. Now, like I said, I mean, I'm not a spring chicken. I'm in my late 50s. So, edging up on 60 years old, I came through the fine art world at a time when there was immense, discrimination. Right now, you have a generation of young fine artists who are benefiting from a more diverse society, a more accepting and understanding society. America has never been perfect and it never will be perfect. But we are starting to see a reversal of those fortunes. We're starting to see someone turning, the knob backwards. So I don't know if you know this or not about how museums and galleries work, but museums typically book exhibitions 2 to 3 to sometimes 4 years in advance. Like there's somebody on the books that got a show a year ago, but they won't be showing till 2027.
Damn.
Now, people can ask yourself, how much diversity are we still going to see in museums in 2026, and 2027, and 2028? Are those shows going to be challenged now? Are some of those shows going to be, rescinded? Will funding be cut off? forcing exhibitors to have to change what they're going to show in place of these exhibitions. And if people don't believe me, they don't have to look any further than the Amy Sherrill show that she had to cancel herself because they wanted to censor one of her paintings that she wanted to show at the National Portrait Museum in Washington, D.C. I have nothing but mad respect for that woman. She is amazing because where she is in her career, being the artist that painted the portrait of Michelle Obama, she has a tremendous platform.
Mm-hmm.
But to say that she wasn't going to let an institution dictate to her what she could put in her show, that's the definition of accountability and courage. And I'm surprised that it's not being discussed more. And I understand that, you know, articles about art and they may not make the headlines and it might not be a sexy topic, but as artists, we have a job. Nina Simone said it best. If you're an artist and you're not painting about your times, then what are you doing? Like, it's an artist's responsibility to record and paint or, you know, document the times in which you live so it can inform us as we move forward in the future. And people think that that's just a lighthearted statement. But I tell my students all of the time, why do you think there's so many fruits and vegetables in museums? Like when you go visit a museum, you see all of these pretty portraits and paintings and still lifes of fruit and cheese and bread on a table. Have you ever thought why that happens to be in museums?
Yeah, actually.
So think about this for a second. And next time you take Cole and Levi to a museum, just share this little anecdote with them from their, their great uncle. Say, your Uncle Milt told me to ask you this question, like, pull out your cell phone and I want you to see when photography was invented. And when they pull out their mobile device and they pull up when photography was invented, and then you show them on this painting that this painting was created 100 years before photography was invented, but you're looking at it in a museum and it looks like a camera took the picture of it. It's photo real. It looks like you could reach into that painting and take that pear out and bite it. But cameras were not invented then. So this information, this artistic craft has been informing us since the beginning of time. You can go through a museum and you can see what time of year it was in that country. You can see what kind of fruits and vegetables they ate. You can see if they had access to cows and goats and milk. Did they create cheese? Did they primarily have a diet of vegetables? Did they have any wheat and barley in? All of these simple things that you see in a museum is giving you information about the entire society and culture if you stop to look at it that way. But if you just go through, you just breezing through on a Sunday afternoon, and you just see all of these fruits and vegetables, you'd be like, yeah, okay, that's cool. Let's keep it moving.
It's interesting. I didn't think about it like that. I appreciate the perspective. So, uh, I asked you, what does uh, you know, self-made mean to you? But now I want to ask you where your determination comes from. Was it taught, learned, or was it built through experience?
It's a combination of all of it, man. It's a combination of all of it. Like I said, I don't want to get choked up. And that was one of my biggest things. I was talking to my wife and I said, I'm gonna be getting interviewed by my nephew, and he might touch on some stuff that makes me think about family, and I get extremely emotional when I think about family. But the simplest way I need to answer this question without getting too emotionally choked up is I would never do anything to embarrass my mother. My entire life has been built on being an example of spiritual morality and achievement. and never do anything to embarrass my mother.
I like that. That's a good one. So, one thing I really want to highlight is the fact that you don't just create art, you tell Black history through your work, you teach it, and you push it forward. So, I'm going to ask you straight up, what does it mean to you to spread Black history through your artwork?
Well, I want to rephrase that a little bit because what I'm dealing with is the Black experience that I believe informs, validates, and solidifies American history. There's no separate history in this nation. There's not an American history and a Black history. There's an American history that has been dramatically impacted, improved, and made valuable by the Black experience. So I like to frame it that way. That being said, the reason I teach it is because I believe that, you know, because of certain policies and conditions that have existed in this nation, that it's been a designed strategy to chip away at the self-esteem of young Black men and Black girls, and ladies, men and ladies, Black boys, Black girls, Black men, Black ladies. There has been an extreme campaign at chipping away at the self-esteem of that infrastructure for generations. Now, when people say nothing can change, that's the furthest thing from the truth. Me and you are sitting on a platform that has the potential to reach 1 or 100 million people. Nobody knows how many people it will reach, but what we do know is what it has the potential to reach, which is a dramatic accomplishment coming from a legacy where communication between us was regulated and the law of the land.
Hmm.
It was legal in this country to keep African Americans from being educated. It was legal in this country to say that it was illegal for African Americans to read. Frederick Douglass became the most photographed American during Reconstruction. Why? Because photography had just been invented, and he said that it was important that every time somebody saw him, he was going to be the stellar example of what Black achievement and accomplishment needed to look like. He never smiled in a photo because he said he had nothing to smile about. His work was not done. When we start to investigate and know some of these historical nuances and facts and in researching these individuals who made tremendous accomplishments, that better informs us. That tells us why this should be important. I see young Black men and Black boys every day in my work because I teach young people that are incarcerated in juvenile facilities. That's the art I teach. I'm not a normal art teacher. I have a very specific program, and I work with incarcerated youth. But the reason I choose to work with them is because I could have been one of those youths. Well, after my father died and my brother, my protector, your father, joined the Marines, Oakland was wild. It was exploding. It was just entering into the crack era. Stuff was out of control. I could have easily slipped into that path. I could have easily stumbled into a life of something that would not make my mother very proud.
Mhm.
But history, curiosity, and creativity was enough to open up a few doors that has allowed me to be here with you this morning.
And
History may not seem important for a lot of people, but
facts.
history is not the past. History is the past, the present, and it is going to dictate and influence the future.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And I feel like what you just said is very powerful, especially because a lot of times kids, especially black kids, need to see themselves reflected in something real, something creative, and something bigger than themselves, right? And you're adding to the culture in a way that will outlive all of us. And I feel like that's legacy at work, right? And now I want to talk about something that's very important to me, um, is the importance of uncles. Because growing up, uncles were like a second line of defense, that extra layer of protection, wisdom, straight talk. And, what does being an uncle mean to you? How
Oh
do you
man.
see your role in the next generation in the family and with your students?
Ooh, that's a deep one, man, because I got a gang of nieces and nephews. You happen to be one, and have provided me with a couple more. But you know, even being referred to as Unc by, a younger generation of artists and creatives, that's a whole nother um definition of the word uncle, being embraced in this extended family way. It's tough, man. All I say is this. You know, everybody everybody has an origin story. I don't think mine is any more captivating or any more unique than anybody else's, but one of your cousins, different from the one that we started this conversation off with, one of your cousins affectionately referred to me as the Black Forrest Gump. And when he said it, everybody started laughing. And as we were able to have a more, nuanced conversation about the comment, he was like, "You've met so many people. Uh, your work appears in a lot of places that the average person, wouldn't even think. Like, man, we see, I saw Uncle Milt painting. Like he, okay, so I get a text. I will get a little bit off script. I'll come back. I get a text and it says, Unc, I was watching Netflix, man. It's that show Starting Five. Have you watched it? And I didn't even know what it was. And I was like, nah, I mean, what is it? He was like, no, Starting Five. It's this show where they're following 5 NBA players this season, as they go through the course of the season, this, that, and whatnot. And it's on Netflix. And he was like, Jaylen Brown from the Celtics is one of the people that's on the show. And he went to Cal, and I was like, yeah, Jaylen Brown. He played, I know who he is. I don't know him personally. I mean, I know who Jaylen Brown is. We smashed him. Golden State
Mhm.
Warriors beat him in the championship.
Yeah.
Shout out to Jaylen Brown. So he was like, in Jaylen Brown's segment, they were at the Black Panther Party Museum in downtown Oakland. So now my antennas go up because I'm very familiar with that institution.
Mhm.
So he say, man, he was doing his segment and he was talking about how like that history, Oakland's history of activism and the Panthers, like was really inspiring to him. And I was like, wait, hold up, wait a minute. He was like, man, let me rewind this. So he said, I had to back up, dude. He was like, one of your painting is in that documentary. And I was like, no, it ain't. He was like, nah, for real. And I was like, well, they do own my artwork. Like they do have some of my artwork. But I didn't know that, it would be captured on film in this documentary, but it is. And it's amazing. Like I get those type of texts and I get those type of DMs where people will be at, the 49er stadium or or the Golden One Center in Sacramento, Chase Arena, um, they'll see a painting of mine in a public setting, and then they have to reflect. And I think the reason is so impactful or more meaningful for them is because I'm extremely accessible. I'm just a normal person. Like, I just happen to know a bunch of famous people. I just, but
Uh-huh.
me knowing them or those individuals owning my artwork, I'm just Milt from Oakland. And to a lot of people, I'm just Uncle Milt. They got my cell phone number. My cell phone has been the same for 30 years. It ain't never changed. you know,
Uh-huh.
it's, that's just who I am. That's how I move through life. Being an uncle for me is really just about being my authentic self. You know, um, Call me anytime you need to call me. Ask me anything you want to ask me. I'm going to be unvarnished, unfiltered, unapologetic. You may like what I tell you. You may not like what I tell you. Sometimes we got to get some hard truth. Sometimes, got to be a little bit more tender. Got to be a little bit more, got to have a little empathy for a situation. You got. So there is no cookie cutter situation for anything. But the one thing that I like to say I bring to the table as an uncle is I'm going to be authentic. Regardless of when you catch me, I'm just going to be me.
And I think like that's real, right? And not only that, but I feel like sometimes kids will talk to uncles about stuff they won't necessarily tell their parents. And I feel like that's needed at times, right?
Yeah.
And the guidance you give them can change the whole trajectory of their life. And you've always been that for a lot of us, and I appreciate you a lot for that. Like you or you have helped shape me into the man I am today, and I appreciate you for that.
You're going to try to
And
choke me up again,
I'm gonna
huh?
tell you a funny story, okay? About uh like I tell people all the time, I have a famous uncle who's an artist, and they laugh at me, right? Like, well, who is he? I never seen any of his work. I'm like, I'm telling you, he's famous. He's a famous dude. And the boys never believe me either, right? So I have a couple of your pieces hanging up in our living room, and one of them is the one with Radio Raheem.
Uh-huh.
And Levi knows all the other people that are on the wall, but he didn't know who Radio Raheem was. So he took out his
Okay.
phone. He didn't want to ask me, right? So he took his phone out. He used Google Lens to capture who that person, to try to figure out who it was. And then it's like an article from like um, some newspaper in California pops up, and it's you standing on stage holding the same picture, right? And it says, something awarded to uh, artist Milton Bowens, and he sees the Milton Bowens, and he's like, "Hold up!" And he comes over to me with his phone, and he's like, "Hey, Dad, Milton Bowens, isn't that your uncle?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Wait a minute, your Uncle Milton is famous? He's a famous artist? Like he painted those, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, my Uncle Milton painted those." And he was like, wait. You mean to tell me that we have a famous person in our family?" And I was like, "Yeah, bro. Like I've been trying to tell you this whole time." He's like, "Oh my gosh, I never knew that."
That is
So that was his moment of like, "Hey, I didn't know you had a famous uncle." And I was like, "I kept trying to
that's
tell you,
too
man."
funny. So now you're gonna have to do a favor for me. You're gonna have to figure out who are Coles and Levi's two famous icons that they look up to,
Okay,
and then text it to me.
okay, I got you. And we're gonna go ahead and close this conversation out. And I just want to say thank you for being here. Your story, your art, your leadership. To me, all of it is legacy building, and legacy doesn't just happen. It's built through accountability, determination, and showing up constantly for the people who depend on you, and also for the people who's watching you. Family, if you're listening to this, remember, being self-made isn't about doing everything alone. It's about owning up who you are, who you're becoming, and what you leave behind. Until then, take care of yourself, and remember, no matter what you're going through or the challenges you're facing, your roots are stronger than you think. See you next time.